Okay, so yes, we are now headed into part 2 of our day, Algorithmic ODR with Linda, Chris, and Larry, and then we're going to take a little break, and then we've got Andy, Nicholas, and Graham. So Leah, maybe I can hand it to you to make some opening comments to kick us off.
Well, welcome everyone. I hope many of you were able to be with us this morning. We might have some new folks. And so let me just say, I'm Leah Wing, co-director of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution, along with Ethan Ketch, who I'm sure is on the call, and he's the director, and worked closely with Colin Rule and Janet Martinez to develop the program. If you are just joining us, we'll just say that we had an amazing morning, started off by an incredible keynote who set the stage for both days in thinking about AI and how it relates to ODR systems, and then had a panel on AI and bias, as you can see from the program. And now the next panel is going to be taking up the mantle to think about issues around fairness and accountability. I'm excited to hear what they have to say. We follow that with another panel that's going to be talking about AI and ODR, some of the exciting projects that are already underway and new ways of thinking about it. And for those of you, again, who are just joining, just to let you know, tomorrow we'll be focusing on AI and dispute system design. So the pace of the conference has been going beautifully. We've been staying on time. We appreciate everyone's participation. You feel free to put in comments or questions in the chat. And with that point now, I'm going to hand it over to the next panel. And I think that the moderator is Linda Seeley.
Yes, thank you, Leah. And hello, everybody. It's good to see you. I am Linda Warren Seeley. I am the director of the section of dispute resolution for the American Bar Association. My co-presenters today, and they are the experts, not me, are Chris Draper, and Chris is a member of the section. He is a mediator, but he is also an engineer. He is the principal at Troct, and please ignore the cat. This is Bellatrix, and she will be joining us for the discussion. Chris also serves as the chair of the ODR Task Force Working Group 1, and is also our committee co-chair for our technology committee. The second person who will be joining me is Larry Bridge-Smith, and Larry and I have known each other for a very long time, having worked on access to justice issues in the state of Tennessee. Larry started the conflict management program at Lipscomb University. He teaches at Vanderbilt, and he is the principal at Legal Alignment. Larry also briefly served on the council for the section of dispute resolution and will be co-chairing a task force for the section called Collaborative Coalitions, which I believe that he will be talking a little bit about that going forward. Sorry, this cat's driving me crazy. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about why fairness and accountability are important, and how we can actually think about how we're going to create the systems in order to hold AI developers as well as users accountable, and how we can maybe come up with some systems that will help us to enforce those standards and guide rails and guardrails that we're all looking to try to figure out how do we create them and how do we enforce them. When Chris and Larry and I started talking about this particular segment of the conference, what we want to do is to make this as interactive as possible. We don't have the answers. We know kind of in general why we think that we need to talk about this, but we feel like the most important thing is to bring as many voices to the table and to talk about how we can create a system that makes sense. So what are the concerns that we have? And of course, at the ABA, we are a non-mandatory professional association made up of lawyers and other legal professionals. You don't have to be a lawyer to be a member of the American Bar Association. And one of the things that I found in my previous life as being most beneficial to me as a pro bono coordinator and developer and member of an Access to Justice Commission and a mediator, was that the ABA was really good at coming up with standards and with guardrails and with things that other entities and organizations could look to in order to create their own guardrails and systems. So if you think about it, without a cohesive, semi-comprehensive system, we do live in this Wild West, the Wild West concept of AI and how it develops and how it's implemented, and will it evolve or will it devolve into something that is uncontrollable and it doesn't really benefit anybody. With no accountability for the problems or the issues that may arise, you can go back to the radium analogy that was discussed earlier. What happens when those unintended consequences of developing something that's new and different? How do we hold people accountable for that? How do we actually create systems that people will be willing to comply with in a world where there are no boundaries? Where, as we talked about earlier, what happens when California starts to really try to regulate what AI developers can do? Well, they simply pick up their marbles and move to Bangladesh, or they don't even have to pick up their marbles and move to Bangladesh. They can simply say, we're not going to do it. You have no jurisdiction over us. What are you going to do to us? Because people will be able to access whenever and wherever we go. And what happens when it's not just unfair, or maybe somebody gets cheated out of something, but it actually becomes dangerous? What point does it become dangerous? And how do we step in a way that will stop it from being dangerous? So as a director at an association that actually has no authority, no ability to really hold anybody except our members accountable, and even at that, all we can do is kick them out. How do we bring people to the table so that they willingly and voluntarily comply with the standards that we hold are most important? I worry sometimes that if we don't take a hold of this monster, that we will lose control over it, and it will do things just like what we talked about before we actually started the recording. What happens when those systems start to go awry and they start to use other data that we're not necessarily providing to it? How do we do this? How do we involve the stakeholders to use appropriate data? How do we evaluate what's going on and continuously audit the reports? Do we simply leave it to the market to make those decisions? Do we feel comfortable leaving it to the market, the idea that it can self-regulate? I think what we've seen is that that's just not possible. And so when we talk about why this is important, it is important to ensure fairness and to avoid those unintended consequences that grow out of something that's completely unregulated and lives out in the wild, wild west. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris first, and then we'll move to Larry. and I will be kind of monitoring the chat. And what we'd really like for you to do is to actively engage in the discussion when we have completed the kind of formal presentations, because we're not the experts here, and what we need and want is your input, because what we would like to do is to create a coalition of organizations that will come together and bring those voices to the table and help us to develop the standards and some processes for how we can hold the developers and the stakeholders accountable for what they're doing. So Chris, why don't you start, and I will monitor the chat, and as things come up, I'll ask the questions. But also we've decided to reserve 20 minutes at the end for real active discussion and participation. So my friend Chris, will you kick us off?
Thank you very much. One of the challenges of having a long break in between some great sessions this morning is you completely triple guess all of your strategy for how you're going to lay this out. So I'll try and stay as close as possible, but please use this as items to throw out later. As Linda identified, I'm with Troct. And one of the things that we discussed this morning was, yes, we've got this black box. No one wants to open it up or tell us how it operates. In some ways, we can't. And so a lot of our discussions have been around how do we deal with this black box? And the goal of this presentation, a lot of ways, is how do we start thinking about different ways to look at the systems that we're designing, the processes we're dealing with, and the inputs that are going into it, so we can maybe look at different ways to think about the challenges and the solutions for that little tool, because this black box tool isn't going away. And the first piece that we have thought about as ways to mitigate the potential downsides of this little unknowing black box, which, by the way, what it does is it takes in data streams that we may or may not see. It processes them in ways we may not necessarily know to get us to outcomes which we can see, but we can't always see the logic of them, which may sound a lot like a human brain sometimes. So the question is, how do we know whether or not these human brains are working, or these black boxes are working, where we're assuming, though, that the human is our ultimate arbiter in some ways of dealing with these AI systems. And we're currently looking at it in sort of three different ways as we look at these boxes. We're looking at human in the loop, human on the loop, and human out of the loop systems. What we mean by that is a human in the loop system is one where the process may be existing. You'll ingest the data, it'll do some process, but that the human has to actually take an action before we can get to an outcome. We have human on the loop systems, which is where the process is running and the human is watching it and has the ability to stop it. So for the first one, think of a chat bot that has a human checking everything before it goes. For the second one, for on the loop system, this would be a Tesla. The Tesla is driving and we theoretically think it's doing the right thing, but the human's really there to make sure if we're doing something wrong. It's supposed to be there, but stop it before it parks in the back of a semi truck. And the last one is going to be our human out of the loop. These are things where we know that system is so good that it's going to be able to operate without us, and we don't touch it. We intentionally don't let the human touch it to make sure the human doesn't cause any problems. For example, while it's not AI, you have some rocket systems that come out of Russia, which automatically, if you hit certain parameters, blow themselves up before they actually cause any problems. The human has no ability to actually do anything once that thing is going. Those are human out of the loop systems. However, you're never going to get, as Julie identified very well this morning, you're never going to get the human out of the box. The human is so inherent in the design of the box that we have to be clear that this box doesn't live on its own. This box isn't truly unbiased, with bias and intuition in many ways being a function of whether you like the answer. So whether or not that human's in, where it sits in that process, we have to be very clear that there's a challenge that we're not going to be able to get away from no matter what we do. And that the real reason we're never going to get away from it is we need to be realistic with the fact that AI does not see truth. There is no magic in it. There is no thing where it's like, oh, okay, well, I know what the dinosaur really looks like, and all of a sudden I'm going to help you assemble the bones better knowing what the dinosaur is. It's working just like we are, where there is an unknown reality that's in there. And what it's seeing as we start digging out those dinosaur bones is it's going to be uncovering little pieces. And depending on how we uncover them, we can arrive at two very distinctly different outcomes. And our challenge is, how do we start managing systems where it's very easy to arrive at these different outcomes as a functional bits and pieces we see? And more importantly, it's especially important to figure out, what do we do when we actually, if we ever do see the whole picture, where it isn't clear what that picture is. That's one of our big challenges in justice is, even if we saw all the data, if we saw it all completely unbiased, sometimes we have no idea what that face is telling us. It's just complete, it's a mishmash. There's really no emotion. It's sort of made up. We're not sure what to do with it. What do we do with those situations? Because at the end of the day, AI is only going to refine what it sees. It only is able to actually work with what it sees. And when it works with it, we have to be careful in understanding, how does it work with it, right? As we start bringing in data that we have, data on its own means nothing. Data is just little pieces, right? 9 letters or 9 numbers in a row don't mean anything. You throw in a few dashes and all of a sudden you have a very important piece of personal data. We need to be very, very careful about what these little pieces of data mean and how do we deal with them. In a lot of ways, is we have both data that we assume is right in many of our systems, and we have this absence of data, or we have these uncertain data pieces. And how we deal with those is we have in our ways, as we build these, a certain way we think of them. So for example, in this example, if we think of this data on the screen as representing letters, so the binary number becomes a letter in sequence. A lot of our systems are going to say, okay, here's what I do know, or I'm pretty positive this is correct, and I'm going to start using some estimations to get me to a position where I can actually test it. And now the next question is, how do I test it? And now how do I know if it's gibberish? If it's gibberish, again, this is where we cannot separate the human from the box, in that maybe this is a great answer in some cases. Maybe we'll find out that this was the best answer ever, but if we determine what the human believes gibberish is or is not, we're going to see that we're going to actually now keep moving through how we start testing what fits, which is off our machine learning, which is our brute force way of testing. Okay, well, that didn't work, so let's try another one, until we actually arrive at an answer that makes sense based on how it was built. These truths in here, again, cannot be separated out from the human, and they're not necessarily built to do that. These tools, by understanding that I have no ability to actually know what true is, I just know that as I start seeing pieces, I can refine them faster. I start knowing that as long as I use a certain process of testing this, I can now get to something that is going to be similar, which is how I know I end up being right. Because at the end of the day, AI just amplifies and accelerates human processes. Where it can do that well and where it can find value in proving similarities quicker, and those similarities now become relative truths better, very, very, very valuable. And that's awesome. And we cannot be afraid of this process, but we have to understand that if that's what it does, we have to be extremely careful about where and how we apply it. We have to start looking at the actual design, the dispute system design that we're dealing with. What can we answer, which we discussed a bit this morning, but then the process within those designs, and most importantly, those inputs into those processes. Now, when we're looking at ODR systems, and again, when I'm looking at design here, I see when you've got, Jan Martinez in the room, it's hard to, not be concerned about this being misinterpreted, because high level, when we're looking at design in a lot of these ODR systems, I'm sort of breaking these into 2 different sort of realms. The first is when we're looking at, as Julie identified, many of the different things within our court system are really filtering items that arrive out of our e-commerce situation. They're low consequence if we get them wrong. They're high, they are high volume. And they're things where we believe there's a correct outcome. We believe there's always going to be a correct outcome with a parking ticket, the same way we believe that there's correct outcomes with respect to an e-commerce item, right? If I get the wrong thing, there's only a few buckets I could be in, right? I don't exactly know what's wrong when I arrive at the site, but I'm going to figure out that from there, either at the end of the day, I'm going to get a new product, I'm getting my money back, I'm going to they're going to be telling me, no, everything's fine, or I'm in this other bucket where it's like, you weren't on this site at all. What are you doing? So there are always going to be a limited number of correct outcomes. AI in those cases is very, very, very good. As long as we truly do design the system appropriately such that there are actually correct outcomes, such that we actually can take something we don't know, that we can actually find, even if we have the most equitable data set, this system assumes that I can take all of this stuff and arrive at correct. In many cases, with a legal system, that's really just not what we should hopefully want. In a lot of cases, if especially we're looking at mediation, we're looking at hopefully arbitration, we're looking at facilitation, we're looking at facilitating processes where I have an initiating event and there's any whole range of acceptable outcomes. eBay probably doesn't have an option of getting paid in toilet paper, but this is something where if someone really wants that, I mean, you got your product wrong, you can get, you agree that you get 57 rolls of toilet paper and we're good, fine, okay, that should be an acceptable outcome as long as it doesn't break other laws. We start looking at parenting orders. Parenting is someone who has way too many kids for sanity now. Parenting does not have any number of identifiable buckets of outcomes. The whole thing is an optimization. We have to be looking at ODR from a perspective of allowing it to take that random walk. And when we start thinking about the random walk, this does not mean that AI is not possible. What it means is it's not possible to find the output correctly using tools like AI as effectively as we would think about it when we're dealing with a filtering system. Instead, we need to start looking at what are the processes and start optimizing those processes that allow us to take that walk. That's a very, very different way to look at it, because it's this process itself. We're not talking about, Justice Ramos identified this morning, right? Do we really need to open up the algorithm, or can we actually look at the output of the algorithm to identify whether or not it's working? And I think I do agree with them on the latter. If we're truly doing AI in a way that is AI, how it gets there would be the same way, how that algorithm is truly built and how that algorithm is truly learning would be a lot like saying, okay, we're going to open up this person's brain and figure out how it's firing. The answer is, doesn't actually end up with something that is unbiased, and is our outcome appropriate for that? And as long as we're optimizing and validating and actually seeking transparency of outcome on the right element of what it's looking to do on that actual process, fine. If we're looking at the outputs from a facilitating system and saying where the star is going to be what we're actually comparing against, that's probably more importantly we're sitting at the wrong thinking with respect to implementing these types of tools to facilitate the walk. And so when we're getting to that, we need to, if we start thinking about AI differently in this manner, we need to start thinking about what are we actually modeling. In some cases with this random walk, we're modeling the mediation process as opposed to modeling, as outcomes. We're trying to look at, was there any bias in how the actual mediation was built? And we have to now start anchoring ourselves, using mediation or whether any other process we're using in this facilitation sphere, we have to start identifying, have we anchored this on the right model of what we want to be partners with as we're rolling out these tools? Now, in using this in the mediation sphere, I wrote a paper a while ago that owes a good bit of credit to the succinct way that Eva Abramowitz discusses these things, where I propose in this, for example, a mediation algorithm, where if we're looking at the mediation algorithm, it fundamentally is we need to seek to understand, we need to be able to build upon agreements, and we need to ensure that we have full inclusivity. If we have a straightforward type of process, algorithm, these types of items, where right now we're getting wrapped around the axle on, if I bring in something like NLP and say, okay, I need to make sure that it understands all the words because I want to make a decision from the perfect interpretation of words. Yeah, that's going to be impossible for a very, very long time. If I switch up how I approach this and say, okay, maybe we should be actually looking at the process. And if we look at algorithms like this and ones that we can test more easily and find where there's divergence, if we're saying, seeking to understand, either the two parties in that actually understand or they don't. And if they don't, I don't need to perfectly ensure the machine understands. The machine just needs to understand there's a difference there. If one side agrees, we can now quickly identify if the other side does not agree. Inclusion for AI is going to be one of those where we can do inclusion better than almost most things. It knows that we've had either enough input from one or we haven't had another. If we're looking at some of these in some of the tools we're building, for example, if we're using simpler things to actually identify where we have divergence. For example, if number A is something that both the parties agree to in a mediation, and then B is something they're debating on, which conflicts to another group's position in C, those are problems where we can actually solve those areas where we have contradictions quicker than ones where we can actually confirm that we're agreeing. Now, from there, we can start asking those questions. We can prompt with questions that try to lead individuals to identify where there's irrationalities. We can start to use AI to identify quicker what may be a better question, or how can we actually ask that one better to help us get there, or we can maybe see those conflicts quicker and more deeply. These are types of items that if we flip how we're actually looking at the problem we're looking to solve, we may get into situations where we can build these tools to be useful prior to being perfect quicker. In the same way that we theoretically want to have a completely unbiased mediator, we also don't want to have a 5-year-old running the thing for a $20 million dispute. We need to make sure that we're limiting where the impact is of that unbiasedness, of that unknowing tool, and then make sure that as we start to say, I actually want something more experienced, I'm actually very clear on how I train that individual how I train that individual to actually gain that experience. And this gets into the last piece where we're talking about the actual design of the dispute in this general form of, are we filtering versus facilitating, is how I tend to look at the types of tools we're dealing with often in ODR space. We're looking at the process that we're looking to apply things. Then we're looking at the inputs. And the inputs is another big thing we're discussing this morning. It's a lot of times we're thinking about that being data. How do we fix the data problem? Now, a lot of times the big two things that we're looking at in the space of fixes for it, how can we actually improve the data? How can we make sure the data that we have is the type that we want to start informing our systems with? There's a lot of discussion around data pools. Data pools being this idea that if I just massively increase all the data I have, that things are going to just be better, right? Data pools, we already have these things existing. They're not completely unknown. The data pools, as we're seeing them in the commercial space, in this one, the GDSN is looking at different products. So in that space of making sure that I'm exchanging information about things that are going through retail environments. If I know there's more data, awesome. If I expand that pool that everyone has access to, I'm going to hopefully be able to come up with better predictive models to make sure that I can sell people the right better stuff, and that everything is going to be better because I'm sharing more stuff. I know more stuff. Insurance companies are sharing pools of data, quite regularly in ways that we may or may not actually ever want or fully appreciate, right? There's all kinds of data pools existing. There's a lot of discussions about data trusts. Data trusts is typically, thought of, okay, I'm going to own these pieces of data, or I'm going to own these metrics that are built off these data, and we're going to share in the revenues of how it's actually used. But again, similar idea where if I start to actually pool across different boundaries, these different pieces of data and just have more, it's always going to be better. And now this is where we're going to hand over to Larry in a few here, because that idea that more is always better is not always necessarily just that blanketly simple, right? We know if we have a perfect system and we know the outcome, we know a coin is going to flip 50-50, if we get to infinity. But as we grow our information about that coin, it doesn't necessarily always grow that way. And we may get to positions when that coin is growing, where the information about that coin is growing, where I may arrive at information that is divergent from what I know is real. I may have, for example, that data, as we talked about this morning, as I use that data itself is nothing. If we know we have 5 heads and 2 tails, there's only a certain amount of information I can get out of that. And the way we build that information will sometimes inform, will often inform that data in a recursive way. And our decision making is going to do the same thing, where it's going to take that information built from that data. The data itself in its own little, it's in isolation. The size of it is irrelevant compared to how I assemble it, how I slice it, how I use it for information, and again, how I actually apply it within my decision making. We know in a perfect system, in a perfect 50-50, that if I throw this thing infinitely, I will get to 50-50. But in real life, for all the things that matter to us, we really don't know what's 50. We don't know what the perfect underlying item is. We don't necessarily, we're never going to get to infinity in any of our lifetimes. And as we start building this data, depending on how we structure it, we're going to have to be very, very careful of identifying, how did we acquire that data? What do we do at that processing layer before we actually used it? And these are the things as we turn over Larry, because the most important elements of these are, it's very important to know not only that the size of the data is important, but it's also the context of how you use that data and who's delivering it. If you stood in front of a room of a bunch of used car salesmen, you probably wouldn't end up with a lot of trustworthy data unless you actually find all those used car salesmen in an auction. And now we might actually now start to get a data point that we all believe in, because we have structured and governed that data in an environment where those individuals who, in isolation, or even depending on the power and balance that you have with them in mass, may be completely misleading, could end up in the right environment if we build correctly, something that actually could be very, very useful, especially even in tools where if they get away from us, we could have major consequences. And so with that, hopefully that opens up to Larry well enough on governance.
Thanks, Chris. So when we're talking about these data sets, and I think that we alluded to that before, there is no control over those data sets that actually flow right in, and whether they're accurate or inaccurate. And the more data you get doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make the best decision. If you're looking at that same penny, does it really matter if it's made of copper or some other metal? And does that really have anything to do with what the ultimate outcome should be? So with that, Larry, you want to take over?
Well, taking over is a pretty desperate statement. I don't know that I could ever take over, despite the natural human inclination to want to. First of all, let me say how delighted I am to be here. I missed out on the great morning that you all had. In large part, it's because I had the benefit of being very engaged in the initiative that Linda referred to earlier. First of all, I want to make sure that you can hear me and that you're seeing my screen and not my presenter screen. So are we good with that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So at the Vanderbilt Law School, where I've been for the past 10 years, literally, and it was 10 years ago this year that we launched the program on law and innovation, I have been deeply invested in and curious about and delighted to see this somewhat slow journey that we've taken as lawyers and as mediators to innovate things that we've been doing pretty routinely for quite some time. But there is no group of people on the planet that I know of that I would rather be with than this group, because you're not the pragmatists, and I use that term in a very complimentary way, that Jeffrey Moore and Clayton Christensen talked about in The Innovator's Dilemma and Crossing the Chasm. I doubt that you'd be on this if you were not at least an early adopter or an innovator. And as I look at the crowd, I see a whole lot of innovators. And so this is a kind of conversation that I rarely get to have, because you've already crossed the chasm of chaos and confusion and disruption from the status quo that we all were part of at one time. And you're looking for solutions to solve the problems that our old ways didn't solve. That can be very broadly stated. But why this is important to me, I think, is going to be as apparent as the recognition that the work that we're doing is as fundamental and as core to the human existence as the democratization of everything. And we can go in one of two directions, and that's a very binary statement that I just made. But we are either moving toward greater democratization or we're moving away from greater democratization. And my sense of the current state of things is there are enough barriers in the way of democratizing human existence that we should be very, very alarmed. And so I want to start there. And what I mean by that is, I don't know if you've been following, for example, how our restraints on democratization are pleasing the adversaries to democracy, the totalitarian, the autocratic, and the despotic hate to see democracy progress. Did you see what Kim Jong-un has recently said as he watches what's happening in the USA? If not, pay attention.
If the election fails, there is no democracy. I don't have to do anything. You're doing it to yourselves. People are divided. Your voting districts are manipulated. Voting locations are closing, so millions can't vote. It's not hard for democracy to collapse. All you have to do is nothing.
Whew. How does that make you feel?
Democracy.
Because the question is, what happens if AI becomes invisible? Meaning, we don't even know when AI is happening, and we trust that it's accurately depicting the reality, whether we like it or not. And what you just saw was AI in action. Kim Jong-un never said those words. AI created that virtual reality well enough, at least for me, to believe that he did. And if that's not even troubling to you because you say, well, he would never have said that, or, oh no, I saw that that was some kind of virtual reality and I didn't believe it anyway. Well, take a look at some of the other virtual realities and AI replications that are out there. Take a look at some that recreate that very common face and voice of Tom Cruise. I dare you to tell me that is in fact not Tom Cruise when AI created it. Or how about the week-long conversation that AI had on Reddit, very sophisticated technology users tool, that was not a person on the other end of the conversation, but AI. And they didn't realize for a week that that was not a human being talking to them. Instead, it was GPT-3 working on the basis of what it could learn from the internet. And I would suggest that it is already invisible. So what is another example of invisible AI that could affect us in the ODR space? Is Zoom an invisible AI? Well, every day, because of what we've done over the past year, I was just on an interview with Susan Guthrie, one of your colleagues, our friends, this morning, and she's trained over 17,000 mediators in the last year to do their mediation on Zoom or other virtual reality platforms. Guess what? Those platforms are collecting exponentially greater amounts of ODR data each day. I'm sure you probably have seen the capacity of Zoom to record and automatically generate a transcript. Did you realize that you're contributing to the capacity of AI to do ODR or mediation on a platform like Zoom? You're giving them all the data they need to do it better than we can do it. Did you realize that? Who owns that data? Zoom. How do I know that they own that data? Well, what will they do with it? I gave them permission to use it in whatever way they wished when I signed up. Because I needed to use Zoom so badly, I didn't read the privacy policy. I didn't read the terms of service. So I just said, yes, of course I'll use Zoom, even though I gave Zoom, this multi-million dollar, approaching billion-dollar organization, the rights to use my mediation data to create the kinds of systems and applications that Chris was referring to earlier. Now, we can either simply say, oh, I'm going to wait and get around to that sometime because it's not that pressing. I would like to light a fire under us and say it is that pressing. It's time for us to do more than talk about it. It's time for us to engage in governing AI. Now, just in essence, there are three basic ways to govern AI or anything. You have government and the statutes and the regulations in the courts, and those of us who've been in the law for any length of time know how that works. Fewer of us, and I would point to people like my dear friend Dan Rainey, who's on this call, are also very active in the standard setting organizations as it relates to ODR, as it relates to the work that we're doing. I happen to work with the IEEE, which is a standard setting organization for electrical and electronic engineers. And the initiative on which I work is ethical AI. I believe in the need so greatly that I'm going to give my time at no cost to them to try to help change the way AI works for the betterment of the democratization of the world. Well, that's great. How long do you think the ISO or IEEE have been working on those standards? Years. It was 2 years ago that the IEEE came up with an ethical framework. They're not even close to a standard yet. Okay, so what's the third? Well, it's consensual, it's contractual, it's by way of agreement. So we know how that works too. Lawyers, mediators, we intimately live in agreements. So a governance of any of those kinds is trustworthy if it's transparent, if it's enforceable, and it's consistent. Let's see how AI is doing on that front. Oh my, we love to either hate or love Facebook. I think we can all say we hate Cambridge Analytica because how it literally manipulated elections by using AI to influence those who hadn't made up their minds yet how to vote. And they successfully threw elections, and it's arguable that they were significantly involved in one of ours. Well, a lot of data there, a lot of analytic power there. What happens when the two of them get together? The Great Hack. If you haven't seen it, you must. A Netflix documentary that talks about the impact of Cambridge Analytica using the data that Facebook had generated and that they were given access to for a very substantial fee, which gives me at least no hope in the governance of contracts, of standards, or of the government. So where does that leave us, and why do I have any hope at all? Well, this is why I have hope. I highly recommend the book, The Second Machine Age, written by two MIT computer science specialists, researchers, professors. And what they brought us to was an understanding. What they brought me to was an understanding in their view that there have been two machine ages. Some people talk about the fourth industrial revolution that we are now in, a digital Internet of Things commerce, which is all true, but they've distilled it a little bit more simply, and I think far more compellingly. When they talk about the first machine age, it dates from the time the first commercially available steam engine, which was able to render power in a lateral way, which turned it into a commercially viable tool, was in 1810. Their position is that the rapid progress of human development until 2006 was linear. It was pretty predictable. It was very progressive, and it was a steep slope up, but it was a straight line. But the characteristics of that machine age was it was competitive. The best one will win. The first one out with the best machine controls the market. You have what you have, I have what I have, but I want more of what you have approach to the way in which human beings relate to each other, we know very well as lawyers. And as mediators, we're trying to stem that tide of competitiveness, because what it's born of is a notion that this is a scarcity that we have to protect so that I get what I need and you don't get too much of what I need. That's the first machine age. But in 2006, and they provide a great deal of data to support this notion, the second machine age began, which is the result of digital information and the capacity to exponentially develop progress through analytics and the computer processing power, which leads to a different kind of environment and economy, which is collaborative and abundant. I know that sounds crazy, but if anybody's going to believe that, the people on this call should, because I think we understand that collaboration is actually value added, and it can actually make a pie bigger, our common standard language. If that's true, then we can talk about abundance rather than scarcity. So that's the premise. Let's examine it. If you know anything about computer processing, you've heard of Moore's Law. Gordon Moore in 1984 charted the course of machine progress, not just from the computer age, recognized there by either the vacuum tube or the transistor column, but all the way back into the mechanical age, because as early as 1900, there were mechanical calculators that were doing math faster and better and more accurately than a human brain. Well, that's AI. AI is when a machine does something better and more reliably than a human can. So if you use his projections and then you begin to plot all of the advances in machine learning or artificial intelligence, and all the way into the integrated circuit, into the time of computer processing, into the data analytics, and into today, this is how he plots it. He also said that by 2025, Moore's Law will break. Computer processing in the binary world of zeros and ones, recall what we saw in Chris's display, the binary computing processing power of computers will no longer be able to double in speed while halving in cost, which is the essence of Moore's Law. By the end of 2025, that will break. That's his view. Well, let's check that out. Is this linear? Looks like it. Or is it itself exponential? So let's put Moore's Law on an exponential chart of time and the power of technology. Because if the writers of the second machine age are correct, we've moved from a linear era of progress into an exponential era of progress because of the access to digital data and the power of computer processing. So their premise is that we reached the knee of that curve in 2006. Well, then where are we today? If their premise is true, are we here or are we here? Well, here's the fact. It doesn't matter, does it? Because if we're in an exponential age, the rate with which things change is not predictable, it's exponential. It changes so rapidly that we cannot anticipate it, predict it, or necessarily be prepared for it. Feels pretty much like today in technology. Just as soon as GPT-3 came out back in August, and the incredible capacity to use a processing tool to, in natural language, speak to the internet and the internet speak back to you without human intervention. That was pretty phenomenal. And a few short months later, Google showed us how outmoded that was by coming up with an analytic machine that was 300 million times faster. That's exponential. So as a result, is there a potential that collaboration can lead us to an era of abundance, or are we going to still continue to compete because we're dealing with scarcity? The question then is, can governance keep up? So is governance exponential? Can government statutes, regulations, and courts keep up? Clearly not. Even the incredible advances of standard setting, which the ABA, as Linda said on the front end, is totally committed to. Is standard setting keeping up? Clearly not. So what's left? Well, maybe if we were to agree, maybe we can keep up with technology by agreement. Okay, let's look at agreements. Agreements are consensual, and we know this. Our law school training taught us that an adhesion contract is an agreement unless it is so unenforceable because it is unfair. It's simply to say, I agree because I don't have any choice. Well, there hasn't been a single yet term and condition or service agreement in any technology that has been deemed to be unenforceable. If there is, please tell me, I don't know. So what are other forms of agreement? Well, when you click, I agree, you're signing up and giving the data to Facebook, to Zoom, you name it, Amazon, to Google, and they can do with it anything they want because simply we agreed. So we're living in an adhesion era of agreement with respect to data ownership. How's it working for us? I would suggest it's not working at all. And then there is that imbalance of power negotiation in which, well, okay, I'm going to agree, but only because I must. I don't like it, but you're not giving me any options. We're not even at that level of agreement with respect to data ownership and data privacy. Okay, how about this one? Industry standards, just commonly known, not independent standards like the ISO or the IEEE, are probably the best indicator of standards by way of agreement that are applicable in a particular industry and enforceable because it's the standard by which the providers and buyers in that industry typically operate. Well, that's an agreement. So are there some consensual AI industry standards? Yeah, there have begun to be. The European Union in December just published in January, maybe it was February, their research on what AI needs to protect in terms of values and principles. And these are those 13 principles. There is no law yet.
I'll go through them at some point.
There are no rules yet. There is no regulation. There is no statute. And it took 3 years to get to the place where the EU, who undoubtedly will seek to regulate, has decided what the core principles are. Take a look at those. I won't read them. You can read them. I could sign off on every one of those. I like those. Those are standards that I wish were a part of every AI service agreement that I sign, I agree to. So how are we going to go further? I've submitted a paper to the group providing this, in which a PhD in AI and I wrote last year for the conference of the International Association of AI and Law. And it was a call for an artificial intelligence constitution. Well, we are hopefully headed in a direction in which such a document and such a set of principles can apply. But what about between now and then? How long is it going to take? Because of the exponential speed with which AI is developing to come up with a constitution that impacts the way in which AI affects us and the democratization of everything. Not fast enough. So here are some things that I would share with you. Last Friday, you can watch this video. It's an hour-long webinar hosted at the Fletcher International Law Society organization, university, college in the UK. And it was an international law dialogue about human rights in the era of artificial intelligence. If you can't find the link, just email me and I'll get it to you. But there, in that dialogue, some pretty brazen statements were made, which I happen to agree with. There are enough laws right now. There is enough knowledge right now. There are enough people who care right now to make artificial intelligence respect human rights. We don't have to wait for government. We don't even have to wait for the standards. We just need to roll up our sleeves and do it. And that age of implementation that I referenced earlier was introduced by the MTech, that's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Digital Conference. And it's an annual event on artificial intelligence that isn't designed for AI specialists. It's designed for you and me. So we don't have to sit down with an AI engineer on either side of us to translate what they're talking about. I encourage you to get educated about AI because it is on us to do something that will help AI help mankind instead of those who've created an AI application to do so at our expense and exploit us in the process. We can become knowledgeable enough to be actors. And so that's my question. Are you concerned enough to act? Because if you are, Linda's reference earlier to the ABA Section of Dispute Resolution Conference, not conference, I'm sorry. We called it a project and then we called it an initiative. But since it was conceived in January, launched last Thursday, it's become a movement. Chuck Crumpton is on this call. The two of us have sort of been the crazy idea of people behind it, but it's coming into fruition because there's a conviction on the part of enough people that are not just lawyers, they're not just dispute resolution specialists, they are that, but they're also technicians, technologists, they're AI engineers, they're public policy specialists, they're human rights specialists, they're social justice specialists. The professional capacity to follow the collaborative model is underway right now. And last Thursday, it was launched. If you haven't heard about it or want to know more about it, you can reach out to Chuck or to Linda Seeley or myself, because this is a movement that, if inaugurated as it already is, we can bring together enormous capacity of resources, of skills, intelligence, knowledge, expertise, technology, professional knowledge, and we can create a change. That's my plea, that's my joy, because I think it's more than possible. I think it's essential. And if we're not going to do it, who is? So with the, yep, go ahead.
So Larry, I wanted to kind of bring the conversation back a little bit to something that Justice Simonis had mentioned. And he says in the chat that your not so deep fake example was another valid and excellent retort to his question earlier today about, should we focus on outcomes or should we focus on algorithmic transparency? And what I'd like to do is to kind of ask both you and Chris to maybe address that a little bit, because I think that for many of us, when we're looking at this issue of how do we ensure fairness, accuracy, and accuracy in these AI outcomes, do you feel necessary to really look at the algorithmic transparency, or do we focus on outcomes? Do you think that there's an issue in transparency or versus outcomes, or are these two, to use Chris's example, sides of the same coin? So Larry, could you address that? Maybe Chris, you as well? Larry, you are on mute, dear. Larry, take off mute.
There, it just took me a long time to find which layer it was under on my 3 screens, so I apologize for that. I'm happy to do that. Chris is the engineer, and I think his answer is more pertinent than mine, but my answer is absolutely. And if you look at those principles of AI ethics, you'll see that explainability and transparency are essential if we're going to have ethical AI. So my answer is clearly yes. And I can assure you that as an AI technology provider, when I talk to clients, I assure them that they will decide what degree to which their data ownership is shared and in what degree it is anonymized and democratized so that they control its release, not me. And I'm going to make that a part of my consensual agreements with anyone who uses technology with which I'm a part. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris. He's the engineer, and I know he can find his mute button much faster than I can. So I'm going to let him give the real answer.
I guess if AI is working as we expect it should, in the theoretical, 3 stages, which we don't have right now, right? I mean, right now, when we're talking about Watson, in most cases, we're not even really talking more than analytics, right? When we're saying, okay, yep, I'm using Watson on such and such. Well, yes, and not really at all. And so when we're looking at the applications in the court space, we're looking at the holes in the data that we have in a lot of the legal space, and just the general uncertainty of humanity in general. To say we're using AI right now, I think beyond email filling and things like that, I think is a little bit of a stretch. So, but if we're talking about as we go into the future and we're starting to get into completely unsupervised systems that are going to be able to learn themselves, like it's not just the car has some adjustment over in has some adjustment to a bicyclist because it's seen it enough and so it knows it needs more space there, but getting into whether or not how it should approach problems. I think to say that we're always going to need to be able to see how it works is again going to be as difficult as saying I need to know how all the neurons in your brain are firing. Now, I don't think that means that we have to say, okay, we're going to give up on the idea of repeatability and auditability. I think those two are incredibly important. If we're saying, if we apply AI where it's useful, which is identifying and quickly accelerating similarity analysis, of being able to get us to repeatability in certain ways, however it gets there. I think I'm more on the side, and maybe I misread just the second comment. I'm more on the side of saying we should probably be looking at outcomes versus algorithmic, purity. So I would lean much more heavily on, can this thing do the same thing twice? If we put in the same inputs, will we get to the same place? And can we make sure that if we run this over and over, I have a way to ensure that I know what happened repeatably? That isn't necessarily a given in all these cases. And I think if we're going to start looking at standards first, I think that the first piece is we need to at least know what happened to analyze it. And we need to make sure that we're really applying the tool in the right location to make sure it can truly be useful. valuing whether or not a Ferrari's top speed makes a lot of sense when you're driving to the corner store that's 3 stop signs and 5 blocks away isn't a very good use case for that car for what you're looking to analyze. So the first part is, have we used this tool where it actually can, because it can accelerate and amplify human capabilities, have we put it in the right place for that tool? And the second piece is, do we truly know what it's actually done in that process in a repeatable and testable way?
And if I can just put a footnote to my answer that Chris has illustrated well, and that is that to me, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And I don't have to be the one who has the capacity to audit or understand the explanation or to determine its transparency if I can work with people like Chris who can do so, or my colleague Adele Almasari, PhD in AI. I mean, this is where collaboration comes to bear with an incredibly powerful force when the expertise needed to solve a big problem cannot be solved by a single perspective. That's why this is an important time to bring all of our thinking and experience together.
And that's why you bring all of those voices to the table to be heard. We do have a question from Meyer Sankari. Meyer asked a question about Yuval Harari's prediction of AI hacking humans and his theories of AI making humans useless due to the growth of technology. Meyer, maybe you could expound a little bit on what it is that you're asking there?
Can I, do you mind, can I actually, there's one piece that bothers me a little more in this area, but besides that first,
Sure.
which is, in some ways, I wonder if, again, this gets the issue of, are we worried as much about how well AI is going to do something as we are about how we're going to use the system, right? And I use this to say, for example, Facebook is a great example in some ways of human hacking in general. And one of the things I sometimes worry about is right now, we're worried a lot about whether or not we're able to predict, what someone's thinking next. What I found more interesting and more concerning is the use of addictiveness in many of these tools that have now removed our thought process to the point where it's not that the tool has become a better bot, it's that so many people have become more bot-like. The fact that people are voluntarily choosing to respond in the programmed way more than we're able to mimic that person better, which I think Julie actually identified, Westworld earlier, which again is a awesome show. One of the interesting things buried, I think, in season 3 was this idea that the human algorithm is actually intriguingly simple as long as you actually are modeling the right thing within it. That is the piece to me that is more concerning about Facebook. Not that the AI is going to get better enough for us to be undistinguishable, but the fact that we are becoming undistinguishable from the most basic forms of the ways that we should have hoped these tools would never be used.
And my response is similar and built on Chris's, and that is, we all think that AI is the same thing as Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator. I will be back. We're a long way from superintelligence. That's what the Terminator is. A machine who thinks more broadly, accurately, and quickly than the entire human race. That's superintelligence. We're at a general intelligence stage today. And that means that it's only AI that addresses a singular set of issues and solves it with a pretty limited set of capacity. That's general. The next level, which we haven't gotten to, is when a machine can replicate the capacity of a single human brain. Well, to the question posed about humans becoming irrelevant, until that happens, I don't think there's any threat of irrelevance, because I have yet to see a machine that can do what a mediator can do or a legal professional can do by the exercise of judgment, empathy, and creativity. Now, of course, Microsoft and many other well-funded entities are trying as fast as they can to get to that level of intelligence. But they've got a long way to go, because even GPT-3, which is their latest initiative, the one that was announced last August, has no capacity to relate to the context of human emotion. It can answer questions if those questions have been dealt with in the vast amounts of data on the internet, but it has no intuitive capacity to empathize. Can it create? Yeah, it can create. It can write books. It can write songs. It can write movies. Matter of fact, it can put an artificial avatar in a movie that's populated by human beings in a way such that, oh, Winston Churchill, the real Winston Churchill, could show up in a movie that would be fairly indistinguishable, but it's artificial. It's completely generated by a computer standing alongside human beings acting in real time. That's the degree to which it's currently possible, but it's still not the kind of capacity to eliminate the value that humans presently bring to every engagement. I've often said that I think AI should better be called augmented intelligence until we get to some of these advanced levels, which may or may not occur. And I agree with Chris, I'm not worried about those. I don't think my life will last that long to make humans irrelevant.
So Chris, one of the other...
He used the term useless. In other words, based on just even a recent article published a few weeks ago in the Financial Times, Harari gave a sweeping background about various pandemics in the past and how our new development of artificial intelligence and technology has reduced the number of people even in the workforce, such as dropping from the United States needing 80% of its population working on farms to now down to 1.5% because of these combines that are guided by technology. So what he's saying is that people will become useless. That is, there won't be jobs for them unless they really train to adapt to the new science and technology that's coming down the road in bigger and bigger, faster and faster. So he's not saying that we're irrelevant. He's saying useless, meaning that there will be lots of people put out of work. But in the field of ODR, I still don't understand how we can get to the point where taking a complex case of humans with emotions and many different factors that are driving their decision making. It seems like AI has a very limited scope. I mean, it may be able to come up with the best answer among many possibilities, but it doesn't mean that that would persuade an individual who is hell-bent on getting revenge or some other motive that drives the litigation. So those are some of my thoughts. I've been following Yuval Harari. I think it's just in reading Sapiens and Homo Deus, and I think it's essential reading for everybody, by the way, in the field of AI, is to be aware of him as a futurist as well as a historian.
I agree with you. He does write well, and he writes deeply, and he raises the right questions. You're absolutely right.
And his interviews on YouTube are vast and extreme. I mean, I've never seen anybody with more YouTube presentations and interviews than Yuval today.
And let me answer your question from this perspective of my profession, which before all of the craziness I'm into now, was an employment lawyer. So I've been fascinated about the workplace since I went to law school. It's why I went to law school. And for 40 years, I've practiced labor and employment law. And so I have some deep-seated feelings and experiences about the workplace. And they include, this isn't the first time a technology has disrupted the workplace. The steam engine put all kinds of people out of business, but it gave all people 10 times more earning capacity than had there been no steam engine. And you're exactly right. If you were a buggy whip maker, you had to learn to do something else. But the consequence of learning to do something else was a significant increase in your economic standard of living. AI is the same thing. It's just its disruption might be more difficult to overcome because of the speed with which it's changing things. But there is as much opportunity for individuals who can learn new skills, and you don't have to have a degree, you don't have to have an advanced degree. You can take a Coursera course and begin to understand what AI is and does and how you can fit into the economy by learning how to work with it. Because I do not believe that AI and humans is an either or binary choice.
One piece that, to Meyer's question though, with where can we find opportunities for AI to affect online dispute resolution, I think there's really, in my opinion, I think there's two major areas. And the second one gets a little to Frank's question as well, that's in the chat. And the first one is, as I sort of identified, I think that if we look for AI to find better outcomes in an individual case, I agree with unless you're in a filtering based dispute system, then I think there's going to be challenges there. I think there is no real fundamental value on finding that outcome in a filter, unless you're in a filtering based situation. However, AI actually, depending on people's ages on here, I don't know how well people remember Enron. There was some really cool stuff with big data that was able to actually break a few of the Enron things open, where we sort of got lucky to be like, oh, he's got a bunch of movie references in here. Those types of discontinuities or those types of illogical positions, which is what a lot of our role as a mediator is identifying, okay, it's not only just where can we find agreements in those pieces, it's also being able to say, okay, there's an illogic in what you're saying that's likely emotionally driven. And if I can separate that by identifying where that top 10 list is of illogical pairings are, I believe I would have the ability there to have a tool that's going to accelerate our ability to facilitate an outcome that both sides like, by getting people into more logical space, being able to actually identify those areas of separating that emotion out. So again, I think it comes down to AI. If we're applying the right process, it's often joked, well, I often joke, sorry, I don't know if it is. However, I often joke, if you walk into a room of 80 mediators, you're going to have 476 different ways of mediating, and it's going to change every 5 minutes, right? So the challenge is, until we are honest with what the process and what the data shows is the most functional process, no matter how the edges are dressed up, it's going to be ever hard to apply any piece of technology, which again, all it does is accelerate processes that are well defined. AI is just another method of, again, amplifying and accelerating human processes. But until we know what they are, we're going to have challenges. And so now the question that gets to, the question that gets to Frank's as well is, how do we test that? I think one of the best, there's a number of ways of identifying, bias in a system where we know if we can know that the thing is behaving repeatably, and we have a way to actually identify it's behaving repeatably. If we do have it, we do have systematic ways of saying, well, I'm going to change this variable and I'm going to see how that variable is going to impact that outcome, as long as we know that it's able to actually perform repeatedly multiple times. So in the morning, which was identified where, okay, I put in this whole data set and now I actually get an outcome. If I can do that and put in the same data set and get the same outcome within reason 20 times, or whatever the number is you want to be confident with, if I now take away one of those variables, I can see the impact of that variable on the, on that outcome, hopefully repeatably again. Those ways I can identify bias in those situations. So being able to identify whether or not the system has a fundamental leaning as a function of its inputs that's going to come out with something that is detrimental to specific groups as a function of those variables, we can do that, but it then answers the question, what is fair? And fair is something where I think there is an actual real opportunity for AI here that we are just completely incapable of doing right now, which is we had a talk the other night on, what is there a justice algorithm, right? What is the actual, what would be a justice algorithm? The one that was initially proposed as DARTS is saying it's really an optimization. So if justice is an optimization, and it was proposing that if justice is the optimization of saying that it is the reduction in it's reducing the elimination of inequitable reductions, that we're basically saying something happened. And now all these different variables, whether it be right now, we look at, okay, what was the race or ethnicity of someone? How long was it? How long were they thrown in jail? What was the actual, how much damage was done? We're looking at very superficial, a small number of superficial variables. If we start looking at, well, how did this program in jail actually treat them to the point where can they come back out and not be so reduced on those long-term impacts? The fact of did I arrest an individual? So I didn't even actually get into the prison system yet. Did the actual manner in which I pulled them over? What are the impacts on that going forward? What are those educational impacts? If we look at justice, more broadly fairness, as not necessarily a bright line, because that's all we as humans are able to deal with. 5 is rarely less than 8, but human brains are not built for uncertainty. 5 and 8 are blended things that we see as a point. Justice is not a point. It's not a line. It's not saying here it is fundamentally. And if these types of AI-driven tools, which get into better processing and better size, are going to allow us to actually see these issues of fairness, not as, all right, I've had 8 out of 6, and so, or I've had 6 out of 8 on this one, so therefore I'm fair versus I'm not. That, I think, in some ways, as we start to look at the power of this technology, is the wrong question to ask. And so as we're looking this thing forward, I think saying bias, we can clearly see, given how we actually define bias and how we actually measure it currently. Fairness, I think there are a ton of opportunities for fairness going forward, because with AI and with the other computational capabilities we have, even prior to anything that is getting into a different way of doing computations or processing, we as humans just cannot keep so many variables in our head to optimize effectively as the machines can. Now, data sets are vitally important. Making sure we're actually doing the optimizations on the right process is vitally important. And making sure we get those things right now, I think is our huge challenge, to make sure that we don't end up with something that actually expands and accelerates off of a misdirected track, which I would argue starts fundamentally at, we need to think about what is the best practice of our human processes in our dispute resolution spaces.
So Chris, I'm gonna jump in here because we've got 1 minute left, and I'm gonna raise 2 questions. One of which Leah raised about AI escalating inequality if there's no transparency. And then I think Jeff Aristi also raised a couple of questions about the types of disputes that arise in real world interactions. And what I'm going to do, because we just don't have time to talk about these, is I'm going to invite those of you who are interested in talking a little bit more about those issues to the Collaborating Coalitions discussion that we'll have next month. And I would encourage you to reach out to either me or to Larry or to Chuck Crumpton if you're interested in participating in those discussions, because what we are trying to do is create an entire coalition of organizations that will grapple with some of these kinds of issues. I'm going to turn it back over to Leah to close out for the break, and thank you very much to those of you who participated in the discussion.
Thank you, Linda, Chris, and Larry. Let's give them a round of applause. That was fantastic. Really appreciate all the time you put into your presentations. As always, Chris, you leave me with my jaw hanging down regarding your visuals. But all of the presentations today have been fantastic. Really appreciate the effort people have put in to stimulate our thinking. We're now going to take a 15-minute break. So we look forward to you joining us after on the other side for our last panel today on AI and ODR.
Leah, are you there? Oh,
What you need, Graham?
Graham, this
yeah,
is
I just wanted to quickly check
Graham,
that I can display.
Graham, before you proceed, I want you to know this is being streamed on YouTube Live. So feel free to go ahead if you don't mind. Otherwise, you can email one of us, okay? Or chat.
Oh, I'm okay with the YouTube Live. Yeah.
Great. What can we help you with, Graham? You have a question?
So I just wanted to make sure I can share my screen. I've got my PowerPoint teed up.
You bet. I just made you co-host.
I've been having one or two problems. So if you just...
Now I'm making Andy a co-host as well.
Okay.
And
so you should be able to share your screen now.
And Nicholas.
I do that now, right?
Nicholas as well, yep.
Great, thanks.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes, I can see
Artificial intelligence. So if I, yeah, so if I, oops, where's my, from beginning? Yeah, okay, so in slide view. Okay.
Perfect, works great.
Okay, that's fine. So that's teed up, and then I'll get back to the meeting. There's a Zoom. Can't get back to Zoom. Oh, I've got to stop sharing, haven't
I? Yep, you got it.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds like a terrific conversation I've been missing.
Well, you'll be able to contribute your own chapter.
Yeah, I'll watch that later because I'm touching AI, but I'm distinguishing between artificial and augmented, and I'll explain. But excellent. I'll also be showing a bit of smart settle, of course. Okay, so we've got what, 5-10 minutes?
We've got, let's see.
I have 12 minutes.
12 minutes. 12 minutes remaining. Yes.
Well, thank you, Nicholas. You're
Hello,
going to moderate, Nicholas.
I will.
Excellent. And when do I come on?
You'll be first, if you don't mind. I figured we would start with you and then Andy, and I'd close things up.
So I've cut it down a bit because I've got this habit of struggling to get in the time.
Don't we all?
15, oh, you heard.
Oh, no, I have the same problem.
Oh, you have the same problem. It's going to be bad. Well, at least we're the last one, aren't we, Leah?
That's it. So worst comes to worst, we'll...
So people can have, if we overdo it, people can carry on and just go to bed or finish. Well, not bed your time in the West Coast, Colin. Or for Nicholas, really, you're in Montreal, aren't you? Yep. So what time did we say? 15 minutes each, and then
roughly,
yeah, fine.
Just if we're under 20 each, that's an hour, and that'll give us an extra 15 for questions. So.
Right. But if I am seen to be, if you could give me a 2-minute or 3-minute actually warning.
Okay, I'll do that. Of course, if I do that, I do it in the text, which you don't see during your presentation.
Oh, right. Okay, well, never mind. I'll just time.
Worst comes to worst, I'll make mine shorter.
Verbal.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to get myself a coffee and be able to stay awake.
Sounds good, Graham. And Nicholas, I've had to moderate Graham before as well. Just say, Graham, stop, Graham, stop.
Colin knows. Well, yeah, okay. See you in a minute then.
All right.
See you in a
minute.
minute.
Am I on screen? No, am I on?
Your camera's off, but
your camera's off. There you are.
Now you just turn yourself on.
Right. Just grab your mute
with my bookcase. Yeah.
Grab your mute, and we'll see everybody after break. Thank you.
Yep. See you in 10, everybody.
Yep.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Very excited about our last session for the day. Graham, thank you so much for staying up late. Andy, I think, Andy, are you in China or are you in California?
I'm in China.
Oh, okay. So it's
kind of early.
Early
Yeah,
for you and late for Graham. Well, hopefully we're threading the needle here. I just
Incidentally,
wanted to say,
Colin, I
Yeah,
just
Graham.
emailed Leah. Leah, are you online? No.
Not yet. She'll be back in
I
a minute.
just emailed a link to my slides just in case I had a problem, because all day it's been sticking a little bit and not responding. But
Okay. No
it was
worries.
okay as we tried it before, so hopefully.
Yeah, I think it should be fine. Should be
yeah.
fine. There's one other thing that I wanted to note. Dan mentioned as well. For the order form for the new book, ODR Theory and Practice book, it turns out there's a box with an odd label on both the delivery and payment sections. If you just put none in that box, the form will file. But if you leave it blank, it looks like you get a block. So if anyone's experienced that, if there's a box that seems to be giving you problems, just type none. They're not asking for payments now. I think anyone who orders will be contacted near the publication date, which is a little further out. But I just wanted to say that in case anyone's tried to go and utilize the form that we shared this morning for ordering the new book. So thank you for that clarification, Dan. All right, maybe I should just turn it over to you, Nicholas. Leah, do you have anything you want to say before we hand it over?
I don't, thank you.
Okay, great. Nicholas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, depending on where you are on the planet. As Colin mentioned, Graham is about to go to bed after this presentation, and Andy just got up way too early to be with us, so I thank both of them. My name is Nicolas Vermees. I'm the Associate Dean of Programs at the University of Montreal, and more importantly for this group, I'm the Associate Director of a Cyber Justice Laboratory. And as you can see, I'm being joined on this last panel by Graham Ross, who's the founder and president of the Mediation Room and the co-founder of We Can Settle, as well as Andy Lee, who's president of the eBridge China Research Institute and a professor at Sichuan University in China. And so the three of us, I think it puts a nice end to the discussions today, because we'll be talking about a little more practical aspects of the use of AI within the sphere of ODR. AI, which at least for Graham and myself, as you'll see, and as Larry referred to in the last presentation, we usually use the same two letters, but talk about augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, and we'll let you know why in a few minutes. And so I'll let Graham start, and then Andy will follow. I'll close the discussions, and then hopefully we'll have some time for a few questions, if there are any, at this late stage of the day. And so, Graham, I'll leave you the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Nicholas. Have I unmuted? Yes.
You are.
I am. Now, all of a sudden, let me just thank you very much. And also, lovely to hear and see everybody here. I hope telling everybody I'm about to go to bed won't make people trigger sleepiness in the audience. I'm going to, I feel coming in at the end of the last session, I've missed a really great discussion. I'm going to have to review that online afterwards. I'll just say, it was interesting you mentioned We Can Settle. My heavens, that was about 17 years ago. I haven't been involved in that for a long time. I think you've just possibly picked up the beginning of my bio, but I have been involved in a long time in ODR development, and also more recently I'm advising Smart Settle in Canada, and I'll be showing a couple of the products which do come within the definition I see of AI. I'm talking as I look around for my wait a minute, for my, no, hang on, for my slides. They were there and they've just disappeared. Hold on. I think I did send them. Leah, did you pick them up at all? If I have any problem.
Do you want me to share them and you'll tell me when you want to switch?
Yeah, if you've got them. Did you pick them up on the email? I did,
yes.
Oh, that would be much easier. For some reason, it's just, this is what computers do. Are they showing now? I can't just see, wait a minute.
Yes, they're showing.
Oh, great. Okay, if you want to show in play, that's the first one. Yeah, so the first slide. Oh, yeah, do you want to play the show? So it full screen,
I think that you have sent me a PowerPoint. Am I wrong?
Yep.
So there won't be a way for me to play in the PowerPoint.
Okay, let's just move them up as we go along.
Okay.
Well, back a bit now. I haven't got fully through this intro. So in looking at the Smart Settle Systems 1 and Infinity, which I'm going to go through very briefly on one, which is visual blind bidding. And indeed, We Can Settle It, you mentioned, Nicholas, was an early blind bidding system, but not as powerful as the Smart Settle one. But I've spoken about that quite a lot at these events, and I'm sure many of you, and I know on this session will have already seen it and know about it, but I'll have a very brief overview of that because I really want to get into Infinity, which is more complex, more powerful, and actually, frankly, more exciting. But look, thank you. That's the thing. No apologies for this tired old meme. But you know, this is where we get the bad press, if you like, in the sense that when people talk about artificial intelligence, and I'm not going to bring all those issues up again about how it's very easy to build systems, but it's the old garbage in, garbage out. It's how you feed them and the information they're dealing with, whether or not decisions, if you give them the power to make decisions, whether they are in fact what we are looking for in the nature of high quality justice. Click, please. Leah, if you can move on. Right. There's a more interesting problem that came up recently, I think, in China. I'm not quite sure, Andy, you may know about this one. I'm not quite sure which Chinese city, but apparently one of the cities, they had a system where they would photograph people. And if they see anyone as jaywalking on the roads, they would find out who they are from the image and display the image and identify who they are on big screens around the city. They put this lady up, but in fact, she wasn't jaywalking. Firstly, she was a very senior executive in a major company. And the only reason that she got into the system was because her face happened to be on a poster on a bus that, of course, was in the middle of the road where it was entitled to go. And the system thought from there that this lady had been jaywalking. Shows you how easy it is to get mistakes. Click. Thank you. So let's see, where is the distinction and why I'm using the term augmented intelligence? Because I think that's where the exciting era for ODR is. So with artificial, in a sense, we're building a human and giving the robot the control to make the decisions, and we leave it to them. Click. Maybe I put my hand up for the click. In comparison to augmented intelligence, it's where the system gives a helping hand to the human who is in control. And it's in fact where we augment what is the intelligence of the human and make him able to perform tasks much more successfully, to greater degree than he could ever do without that supporting intelligence. So just as augmented reality takes real reality and it superimpose an artificial reality, so augmented intelligence is superimposing onto the intelligence of the human additional intelligence that only the machine can possibly provide. Yes, please, click. Well, I'll just say Leah, thank you. But now let me talk about these two systems and why I think they are more in the field of augmented intelligence. Smart Settle 1, as I said, is a visual blind bidding system. Click. I think there's lots of little clicks here. Thank you. So just some key quick takeaways, because I don't have very long to go into the detail. But first of all, it is a standalone software as a service, and it be used with any system of ADR or ODR, including telephone or just in-person mediation. So it's not something that competes with many other products that are in the market. It's a tool. It enables negotiation of a single number, which could usually be, of course, money, but it might be something else, the amount of a product to be delivered, or a number of months over which to make a payment. And it be improve this negotiation by allowing not just open offers that the other side sees, but secret offers that the other side does not see. Click. Thank you. But it's important to know that the system isn't imposing, like artificial intelligence. It's not saying what the outcome will be, what the settlement is. No settlement is declared under smart settlement unless it's within the specified range of the parties, unless both parties have actually agreed to that figure, amongst others. Again, and it's what I also like about it, it's constantly nudging the party to encourage them not just to move quickly, but to more quickly get to their bottom lines, and how important that is. And how many times would we say negotiations do not succeed because neither party eventually gets to the bottom line, the figure that they would, if push comes to shove, and to avoid court action, be happy to accept. But for obvious reasons in negotiation, they don't feel it's a good move to do that. With one, you can go to it fairly quickly, knowing that if there's no settlement, you haven't declared to the other party what your position is. Thank you. And the other thing is, one of the algorithms, when it's deciding where to declare or reveal a settlement, because it only reveals it in a figure that's been accepted by both parties, whether it's because the bottom lines have overlapped or underlapped to a degree that they've indicated to the system they're prepared to go that little extra, it doesn't just split down the middle. It rewards the party who's made more effort to settle. Leah? Right, let's quickly do just one quick overview of one particular dispute, which I'll go into later if we have time. But if we don't have time, it is in the PowerPoint, which will be available to everybody. I think Leah, the recordings, and if people want anyway, they can ask me for a copy. This is a standard dispute of a tenant wanting the return of his deposit. He paid $2,000. He has, before using one, been prepared to accept $1,500. There's been no agreement, and therefore they're using Smart Settle One. Click. Here, let me just move the overlay screen from Zoom. Right, so here, I'm just going to show how the system, this is actually how the system looks to the user. This will be looking from the point of view of Seb, the tenant, on the right-hand side. The movements at the top are seen by Leo, the landlord, on the left, but the movements in yellow are not. They are the secret offers. The Leo on the left has actually made secret offers which aren't displayed here as yellow because they're not to be seen by Seb. If you were looking at it from Leo's point of view, this position would be reversed. But you see that they have made secret bids in this case, which overlap. And they've overlapped in a range of $300 between $800 and $1,100. And that was arrived at in a series of bids. You might say normally you'd split that down the middle and the settlement would be $950 back to Seb. But in fact, because he moved more in the early, and his move into this range, this zone of potential agreement, was only $200, whereas Leo had to move $400. A little bit of that gap was divided really into Seb's favor. So he gets $50 more. Thank you. Right, let's move on to infinity. Thank you. Okay, first of all, I can say this is whereas one is using Smart Settle One for a simple single issue, how much money he should receive back. Infinity is for multiple issues and multiple parties. And by issues, I mean, as we'll see, that if there's to be a settlement that involves a number of elements to it, these are all issues that Infinity will assist the parties in trying to reach agreement. So first of all, some initial takeaways about what this is doing. Thank you. And again, as with one, this is not really artificial. This is real augmented. It's not mediation by robot. No settlement takes place, save on terms specifically agreed by both parties. Thank you. And you can think of it just as a tool, like a calculator or a spreadsheet that a mediator might use. And it can, of course, be used within in-person mediation. So it challenges the definition of ODR. Thank you. Now, here's the important point. Unlike a lot of the reactions to ODR system, particularly using AI in the artificial intelligence sense, this is not going to do anybody out of a job. This is impossible really to properly use successfully, except with the skill of a mediator who is experienced in using it and has been trained in using it, and also is already an experienced mediator. Why do I say that? Because to give the best chance of helping the parties reach agreement, somebody needs to input into the system for the parties as accurately as possible the level of interest that each party has in the different elements of what would be included in a settlement. You'll see when I come to show you the screens what exactly I mean by that. But if you don't do that accurately enough, it will not be able to benefit the mediator or the parties. I mean, the whole point about this system, it's going to enable a mediator to come up with solutions that are more likely than not to be acceptable to both parties because of the machine learning that develops in use of the system. Thank you. Right, here's what it actually looks like. So if we look at the left-hand side, this is a dispute that we played with, and it dealt with a rental of a holiday home that couldn't go ahead after the deposit was paid because of the pandemic and lockdown. So this is a very common problem at the moment. Does the renter get his money back? Very often, of course, he's been invited to be given the same, to be given a credit note to use, or to be given an actual date in the following year, which may or may not be the satisfaction of the obligation of the landlord. Now, on the left-hand side, there are 4 elements or issues that have been put into this system. And these are all the sort of elements that one might, at least 3, if not 4, include in a settlement. And by the way, one of the things I really like about Infinity is instead of the parties spending a lot of time arguing over them, who said what, when, and the past, as might normally happen in a mediation, what is the dispute about, it really encourages the parties at an early stage to be looking at what the outcome would be, not the past, but what the future will be. How can we settle it? If the parties are going to be persuaded to use this system, they are going to be focused on negotiating through it the various elements of the package. So it has a very positive initiative and influence on reaching settlement in the first place. So in each of these horizontal scales, this is looking at it from the hirers, the holidaymakers, the tourist point of view. On the right-hand side, in the little gray boxes, is what that person would like most of all. most of it is unrealistic at this stage. So the settlement is going to be in the middle somewhere for each of those 4 issues, or at least for 3 of them. On the left-hand side is the highest level of interest.
And this is sort of my prediction, personal opinion, only not reflective of the government. This is essentially where I think that Amazon.
Oh, sorry, I'm hearing something there. That wasn't me coming out of time, Nicholas, was it?
It was not, but you technically have 2 minutes left.
Oh, 2 minutes, that'd be great. Okay. Right, so what happens is the parties build packages, which by moving these sliders, which you'll see in the bottom right quarter of the page, and you see the system puts values on them. And basically what happens is when you create this system, not only do you create the best outcomes and worst outcomes for each party, in the middle column, you'll see values, 5,000, 1,100. And this is where the parties enter through the mediator facilitator a number, that comparatively compares the interest in each of these issues compared to the other ones. So you see the percentage off the rental the following year is a very highly important issue for this person. And the system learns these interest levels, and that's why it's important to have a really experienced mediator using this system for both sides. If we can move on. And here we have a graph. I won't have time to explain all this, but not only do you put in the interest level in gaining in that issue as a whole, you can plot a graph to show and reflect the moving interest according to the figures that would represent that issue, how much of that deposit would be returned. Thank you. And again, here we have the system with some movement where on the right-hand side, you'll see 1, 2, 3 different packages that have been proposed. Where I've marked one of these packages, and then what happens is the parties create these packages and then they just see what the system tells them, how valuable it is for their own interests, the party's interest. It informs the mediator of the party's interest. But they can at any stage share those with the other side. So initially they're secret, then they can be shared, and it's up to the other side whether to say that they would accept them or not. At any stage, you can ask the system, and this really gets really exciting, to suggest its own packages that it feels are more likely to be acceptable to both sides. And here there are 2 suggestions, package 3 and 4. The system does that because, of course, it understands, it learns through the accuracy of the information fed in by the mediator. This is why it requires trained mediators to use it. So it's not a threat to the work of mediators, quite the opposite. Next slide. Not only does it, and there you see here, an agreement, a baseline agreement has been reached with package 9. Now, if we just go on a little bit, this is, here you'll see that what the system does, even when an agreement has been reached, the system will actually review all the packages and to see whether what it learns from how each side has dealt with their interest levels in presenting packages. It may, for example, be that while it gave a high value to one issue, when it produces packages, it doesn't seem to reflect that interest. So the computer is learning all about this. And when it's told there's been an agreement, it then will still see if there is any value left on the table for it to improve that agreement. And you see package 10 with a value of 3,000, sort of a midpoint between all the packages where are listed in values, is an improved agreement that the parties can then be offered to agree with. Right, next slide, please. And it's not just disputes. Next slide. Here's a system I've used. I mediate in disputes between shareholders, and I also create agreements, shareholder agreements, whether they've had a dispute or not, to regulate the relationship between shareholders and companies. And I've used this, and this is what's taken from one I've used, to actually agree what the terms of the agreement will be. It doesn't have to be disputes. Next slide. And here's a model between a pharmaceutical company. Yes, you can keep clicking, Leah, there's things to come on. Here's a model for a pharmaceutical company negotiating with a health authority, hospital, medical center, whatever, UK, it'd be the National Health Service, over a clinical trial. And you see in red the different issues that would need to be agreed. The budget, how much patients receive, if patients drop out, what's the limit on their payments, their reimbursements, how many trials would have to be completed, dropout rates, and all that. So it can be used for that, even though there's no dispute. Next slide, please. This is a paper. Many of you would have come to the conference I organized in Liverpool a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago now. And there was a live demonstration of Infinity where we imagined that we were there negotiating the deal for Brexit. We were trying to think of as complicated a deal as possible. And we managed, I think it took about 2 hours to reach agreement. I think, from my recollection, certainly a lot better than the one that eventually was agreed. But there we are. This is actually from the paper that's published in one of the editions of the International Journal of Online Dispute Resolution. If you want to read it in full, it gives a very good understanding of how this system operates. Next slide, please. So, isn't this the worry for mediators, that no one can hear you mediate? It's a threat. Next slide. It's not next slide. Wrong. You will continue to mediate exactly as you've done in the past, but have a powerful AI, that's augmented intelligence, co-mediator, whispering in your ear with suggestions to help you better resolve the case. What's not to like with that? Next slide. We can move on. This is my note from my sponsors on my training course in online dispute resolution. I wanted to mention that on this course now, odrtraining.com, you'll see there at the bottom right, I've actually added a set of screens, I think there's about half a dozen of them, that actually go inside the course. It's a virtual online course, which you take in your own time, and list all the elements of the course. Next slide. And I think that's a useful address to go in and see some of the videos that Smart Settle has produced. Now, I'm sure I've run out of time. My apologies, Nicholas. So I won't go on with these slides, which go back to one in detail. There's no need to do that.
Thank you, sir.
That is how I finish. And are we going to take questions now or at the end of the
I think we'll take questions at the end for once all three of us have concluded. So thank you for your presentation, and my apologies for dating both of us, because I actually remember when you launched We Can Settle, and to me it wasn't that long ago.
Wow.
But that being said, we'll get back to the questions after, and I'm sure a lot of you will have questions for Graham. But before we do so, I'll cede the floor to Andy, who will talk about his experience, and more specifically, security issues that we haven't discussed much today relating to the use of AI in the field of ODR. So Andy, I'll cede the floor to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to introduce my work in the AI-driven ODR and the digital security. So can you see my screen well?
We can.
You cannot?
We can. We can see you and we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. And then let me see if I can make it bigger. Okay. And first of all, I'd like to quickly introduce the current state of AI. So AI is become more and more like a human. And in fact, this Sophie is one of the first ever robots. Now it's like a human. In fact, it has the citizenship from Saudi Arab. So that's make us feel that we can be replaced very soon. And what Sophie can do, and I had a real-time conversation with this robot, powered by very extensive, comprehensive AI technology. It can discuss with you with any topic, and they predict and she can even make suggestion or advice to you. So it's like for every aspect, she behave like a mediator. And then let's talk about the our dispute resolution. Before I start with my full presentation, I just tell you there are only three or four slides are really important. The rest of them are those slides I have been talked before, or they are very common knowledge. So please pay attention to these four slides. With the title is a highlight with like a red. So you just pay attention to those slides. And first of all, I just say briefly why we put dispute resolution online and digital. From my point of view, it's because e-commerce present a lot of disputes across the border. So make the traditional face-to-face dispute resolution very difficult. So we have to use the internet to bridge those inconveniences. And another one is, again, e-commerce creates a lot of like a massive micro dispute. That means dispute with very low cost, money, no amount of money involved. And the traditional dispute resolution will definitely cost much more than what this dispute really meant. And another thing is because of this e-commerce market are so comprehensive and so the participation are such a big number. And what we see is that the mediation time is become more important than the results. And actually, many of those big platforms have done some research indicates that the people rather have a short resolution in a very quick way than the real fairness or their satisfaction of the resolution. So we need to give a very quick solution. That's become more and more important. And then on the other side, the computer technology start to really beat the human in many aspects. So we have seen computer start to play games with the human and beat the human. The computer start to predict weather and much better than human did. So that makes us to think, if computer is doing so many things and become much better than human in some of the prediction, advisory, or problem solving, why we don't use the computer in the distributed resolution? So I think that's how we start to see the dispute resolution become online and also become digital. I mean, only digital, then we can start to use computer technology. And this is a dispute resolution. When we put it online and digital, this is what we see at today's state. And basically, everything is online. Everything is passed through internet, and then the AI technology start to advise the whole dispute resolution process. And currently, most of the AI technology are used in to create some very quick resolution, and also to guide the implementation of the resolution. So that is where the current AI technology is using. So this is the what it looks like. And then let's see how we start to use the AI technology to enhance our the ODR process. First of all, we need to we have these questions where the AI replace lawyer or arbitrator or mediator. And one thing we start to see the machine learning become more and more powerful to grab the knowledge. So machine can memorize like millions of tens of millions of cases, and in that aspect, it's much better. It's much more powerful than the regular lawyer or mediator. because they can remember much more knowledge. So if we only based on knowledge, based on the knowledge of cases to make mediation, machine will definitely beat us. Another one is how is mediation of AI participation different from human participation? And I think one of the definition for AI is basically to test whether people can feel this is a human or is a machine. So that's how we at the very beginning define the AI from the other kind of technology. So again, in the mediation process, how do we know this is an AI or this is a human? But today, I think it's at today's technology, we can find out by look at whether this resolution has any sense of passion or humanity. And the current AI is a lack of passion and humanity. And even that Sophie, the one I just show you, the AI robot, is really does not have much passion. And so that is a current difference between AI ODR or human ODR. And the third question, why we introduce AI in the in ODR? I think this question is partially answered by my first slides, because we got a cross border, we have a lot of very small disputes. So we need some kind of computer power to resolve those disputes, and we need to lower the cost of the dispute resolution, and that's why we have to introduce AI. And AI, how the AI used in the ODR process. And we can see there are a few major area of AI technology can be used. One is to collect information. One is to analyze information, and then start to come up with the logic behind all those cases. And also AI is currently used extensively in the language processing, so that different people with different language, they can also communicate in the same platform. And then finally, AI can be used to enhance the implementation of a resolution. So it almost covers every aspect of a traditional dispute resolution. And the AI system currently we used in the in ODR are decision support. Expert decision support basically is to generate resolution. Expert system basically used to advise the mediator. Knowledge-based system is basically to bring in the reference to the mediation process. Intelligent interface is to help people understand each other from different language. Case-based reasoning is basically to give you some guideline for the dispute. Multi-agent system is so you can use different terminals. You can use a computer. You can use your cell phone. Rule-based system is a very first resolution can be generated by rule-based system. So those are the AI system currently can be used in the ODR process. And then for the mediation tool, and we can say those are the tools can be used, can use AI technology to enhance. And there are online tool, there are some analysis tool. So I just don't go through one by one. So there are basically covers all the aspects of mediation process. Okay, the first important slides I'd like to share with you, and then maybe later on we can discuss with you, is after I have been thinking in the past 5 years, the ODR actually bring a different challenge for the traditional AI technology. I started even about 3 years ago. I submitted a proposal to the Chinese academic sciences for the new generation for AI technology that to use for the dispute resolution. Because what we see is the current AI is always looking for the best solution. So like for example, when you drive or when you play a game, you need to find the best move that to avoid for driving to get to your destination for the game to basically beat the opponent. So the current AI always looking for the best solution. But the AI for ODR, first of all, for dispute resolution, there is no best solution. It's very, because there are so many factors. So the best solution is virtually non-exist. Because when best solution for one person, maybe it's not a good solution for another person. So that is a very different different features. Another one is the current AI is used to controlling a rule-based system. And if you look at what AI is doing currently in many applications, the AI is basically control something, and this thing is basically a rule-based. So that means this thing can only go in certain way. They cannot go anything. For example, if we use AI to play a game, the game has to follow certain rules. You cannot, for example, you cannot move your chess in any location you want. So there must be some rule. And if you use AI to drive, the car has to follow some rule. The car cannot, drive at well. So the current AI is controlling a human-based system. But for the AI for ODR, that's not the case, because for ODR, the AI is used to somehow controlling the human reaction. So this two person, and we need them to reach some of the solution. There is no rule for that. And if there is rule, then it must be law. Then that's something else. That's a legal system. So the ODR basically try to control the human, not control, basically try to manage the human reaction in the mediation process. So that's different from controlling a rule-based system. Then the third one, the current AI is focused on next best move. So the current AI is the most important thing is to take the first move, and that first move has to be optimized in the whole course. But for the ODR, I think the next move may not be very important, but the whole process is very important, because people can, the next, you have to think that what's the next move will affect people's feeling, and it may lead to some different paths. So I think the process is as important as the next move, next solution for the ODR. And for the current AI, the historical data are very important, and because that's why for the AI for the autonomous driving, they have to drive 20 million miles to get some reasonable thing. So they need the historical data. But for the ODR, I'm really questioning that. That's something maybe the audience can answer. Are the historical data very important for the ODR? That means all the cases before are very important for the mediator to come up with some good solution. So that's a question. So finally, I proposed about 3-4 years ago, instead of artificial intelligence, we should call the AI for ODR artificial intuition, because it's more of feel. Somehow we need to guide people to come up with something that both sides are happy to. But I'm not sure my English interpretation of intuition is correct. But I think it's not intelligence, because intelligence is more of some, again, it's more like doing something control some rule-based stuff. So this is an important slide. So finally, let's go to the AI ODR evolution. So first of all, we have to define the AI ODR, because now I just see so many, I mean, in the past couple of years, I start to see all of a sudden there are so many ODRs called AI, like AI ODR or ODR AI or whatever. I think it started to become very confusing. So we have to really clearly define what is the AI ODR or ODR in AI. One thing I like to throw out a very general definition is the adoption of AI technology in ODR. So that's too general. And but I want to point out there are something are not really AI ODR. For example, computer-aided ODR. You use computer to organize some data to present the material in a very nice format, and to even generate some empirical results. That's we call the computer-aided ODR. That's not really AI ODR. Intelligent ODR, they are, and also the ODR with adoption of BI or big data tools. Those are very empirical. Anything empirical is not AI. AI is not empirical. So I think there's more things we can exclude from AI ODR that we can discuss later on. But we need to really well define what is AI ODR, what is the ODR in AI, or AI with ODR with AI capability. Then this is important slides I'd like to share with you. We have to, because of now every system, very soon every ODR will start to claim they have AI technology. So we have to distinguish them. Otherwise, it's going to be confusing people, particularly all the consumer will start to, they don't know which one is real AI or what's the level of their intelligence level. So I suggest there are 4 levels. This is something I learned from the autonomous driving. So the level 1 AI ODR is basically they can come up with they can use AI technology to come up with some good resolution for given evidence or the information. So that's a level 1. So the only thing you do is generate a resolution. So the level 2 and the level 3 are something I'm still debating. I cannot really see a very clear difference. The level 2 is we call it AI aided mediation. So that means this. I cannot really. Let me see. How can I make this one off? Okay. So the level 2 is basically we use AI technology to lay out this whole mediation process, somehow to automatically choose the, for example, we have 5 ways to do the mediation. One way, because I have never done mediation, so I may say something wrong. For example, one way is to just do the price bidding. That's one way. Another one is try to come up with a cost analysis. So there are different ways. And the AI is used to choose which way we go. So that's what I call AI-aided mediation. The third one and the fourth one are come to the mediator part. So third one is AI assistant mediator. That means it's almost like the mediator, well, some kind of AI Hamlet. So in the whole process, AI will guide, will advise the mediator, what do you do next? Or bring the reference, bring some suggestion. So it's an AI assisted mediator. Number 4 is that the mediator itself is an AI unit. So actually it's a machine mediation. The human is not there. Human is only used to train this AI unit. So this is what I suggest. We have level 1, level 2, and level 3, and this is up for us to discuss for the later discussion.
Andy, I just want to remind you, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, so finally, I'd like to talk about the digital security. And so there are many, once we start to bring AI technology into ODR, it's just like you bring a mechanical person, a robot, to the ODR room. This robot must bring many risks. So because they are not like a human mediator. We have the ethic. We have many things to ask the human mediator to follow. So for the AI mediator, they should have some kind of rule or some kind of risk control so that they don't damage the whole ODR process. So the risk come up with the AI mediation are the privacy, virus intrusion, and the system risk. So that's how I propose the digital security in the AI mediation. Definition of digital security in AI mediation is all security concern because of introduction of digital system to the mediation process. So this is what my definition of digital security. The scope, there are internet security problem. So it's a risk by interconnection of your AI system to the public network. There are system security. That means your AI system may have some bug. Algorithm security. That means your AI system, you use some, algorithm with some ethic problem. Operator security means the people who run the system have some security issue. So those things are the digital security. Then there are many examples of digital security that possibly involved in the AI system. So I don't just go through like digital security, data security, trustworthy. And how do we manage digital security? We need to do those things. We need to make sure data are secure. We need to make sure parties are trusted. We need to make sure transparency, and so there are many things we can manage the digital security. So finally, I want to say something. One is the current ODR is more like ADR online, so that we need to bring the intelligence or computer intelligence into it. The future ODR is an AI-mediated online dispute resolution, and very soon the mediator has to train their own AI mediation units to stay in business because everybody uses AI to enhance them. And Sophie is a very big competitor. And the success of the AI ODR is based on the management of digital security. This is very important. Technology infrastructure for AI ODR. One is we need to manage the digital security. Two is we need to train AI. Then we need to have big data for analytical advisory. Finally, we need a social credit system for enforcement of resolution. Thank you. I'm done.
I'm sorry, I forgot to turn on my microphone like so many of us during Zoom. So thank you, sir, for your presentation. So we will stop your sharing and I will try to share my screen for the last presentation of the day and try to share with you. And my presentation will be I will act almost more as a rapporteur, as we say in French, than as a speaker, because I feel that a lot of the themes that I was going to address are themes that were addressed all through the day, and more specifically through this last panel with both Andy's and Graham's presentation. And what I wanted to look at is, and building on Andy's 4 levels of AI use in ODR, I see it more, I think this joins your idea that levels 2 and 3 are difficult to differentiate. I see it more as an opposition when you look at the literature on the use of AI in the field of ODR between 2 movements that are present, that of AIDR and that of ODRE. So what do I mean by those 2 expressions? Well, AIDR, and this isn't an expression that I created, this is something that, again, I found in the literature on ODR and AI, and AIDR can be defined as artificial intelligence dispute resolution, and this would be the 4th stage that was referred to by Andy, and it's the idea of using AI to replace what is commonly identified as the third party in an ODR process. And this is getting back to what was mentioned at the very beginning of the day by Colin during the introductions, and this idea of the third party melding with the fourth party, really. And I'll remind you, for those who weren't present this morning and who might not be familiar with the terminology, the third party is the mediator or arbitrator in an ODR process, and the fourth party will be the technology. And this is, as Colin mentioned this morning, this is terminology that was developed by Ethan back more than 20 years ago now. And so this idea is what's behind the AIDR system, or what drives this literature. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have what I like to refer to as AUDRE. And this is something my colleague Karim Beniclef and myself came up with, probably because we're both fans of Audrey Hepburn's movies, and so it's easier to remember. And it's online dispute resolution that's aided by augmented intelligence. And like Graham, I prefer this concept of augmented intelligence, because it's not the idea of AI replacing humans, but rather AI empowering parties. And when I talk about parties, I'm using the expression very widely. So I'm incorporating in that the third party, mediator or arbitrator. So empowering these parties during the ODR process. And this comes back a little bit to what Graham was referring to in his presentation. And so there's a lot of text on these slides, and obviously I'm not going to read through them simply because that would be a very boring presentation, and especially at this late time in the day. But this is a nice summary of what AIDR is seen as. And again, it's the idea that you would take artificial intelligence and use it as a third-party mediator or arbitrator. And the logic behind that, and I'm a shout out to Colin again, and to our common friend, Amy Smith, who's one of the most wonderful people you've ever met, if you have met Amy. And Amy and Colin pointed out that there are strong arguments for thinking this way. The idea of moving towards AIDR, if and when the technology does allow for it, because we know, and we've talked about on the previous panel, about the biases within technology, but let's not forget that humans are flawed as well, and arbitrators or judges or mediators are human and therefore are flawed individuals. We'd like to claim that we aren't, or we'd like to hope that we aren't. But study after study have demonstrated that judges, for example, have made, shall we say, less just decisions, depending on the time of day, depending on whether or not they argued with their spouses the day before, on what they ate, on if their favorite sports team won the day before. And these are all studies that were conducted in the US and in Israel, as far as the arguing with your wife study goes, or husband. And so there is this idea that there's a strong argument from it. And what I find interesting is that this argument is made mostly by two groups of individuals. First of all, and we referred to this again in the previous panel, futurists are very strongly promoting this idea. And this is a quote from Max Tegmark's book, I believe his last one, Life 3.0, where he explains that, well, because human beings have biases, and because we are imperfect, and because the time of day might influence how we make a decision or render a judgment, well, it might be in certain cases more beneficial to use algorithms. And getting back again to these studies that I just referred to. And the other group of individuals that I find in my daily research who are pushing very strongly for AIDR are those in the legal tech industry. Ever since I became associate dean at the university, I regularly get phone calls or Zoom calls, as you will now, from legal techs and people starting to develop legal software using artificial intelligence, and I use air quotes because very often there's a lot of vaporware there, and when you actually look at what the technology they're developing is, you can discuss for a long time if they're using AI or not. And I'm not even talking about connectionist AI. Even symbolic AI very often is not even used in these specific tools, but they're basically selling this as we're going to replace the technology. One of my favorite quotes for one of these tools that was supposedly going to replace lawyers with AI when Ross Intelligence was launched, and this is a platform that stopped operating earlier this year, actually late last year. And their claim was, we will basically, our software will do the job of young up-and-coming lawyers, which is great for the partners in a law firm or the associates in the law firm, because now you don't have to deal with millennials, and that's the selling point that they would use. Of course, today's young lawyers who are not necessarily experienced are the ones who in 10, 15, 20 years are going to be the senior attorneys in firms. And so if we're replacing them now, it's going to be problematic for the future of the profession in a couple of years. But all that to say that this is the argument that I often hear. And the first few words of this quote are the ones that I find extremely problematic and demonstrate that these individuals don't necessarily understand what the law is or does. And I'll read it for those of you for whom it's difficult to read. Since the legal process can be abstractly viewed as a computation, imputing information about evidence and laws and outputing an outcome, some scholars dream of fully automating it with robo-judges. But of course, there are underlying issues to the use of AIDR. And the first one is, well, that statement is simply untrue, right? The legal process is not a simple computation. There are a lot of moving pieces in there. And even if it were, let's say that we can use AI to decide a traffic ticket, for example, where you're right, you were allowed to park somewhere or you weren't allowed to park at that place. Well, mediators are not judges. And this was mentioned by many lecturers today. There are a lot of human elements to the process, and I say mediators, but it's true for arbitrators as well, that there are a lot of other elements that you have to take into account. And you could say, well, you could train the algorithm to act in the same way, but my question is, using what data? One of my favorite books of the last few years is the autobiography by Luc Julia, who is a French computer scientist and one of the creators of Siri. And his autobiography, which he actually called Artificial Intelligence Doesn't Exist in French, I think just says everything you need to know about his position. And one thing that he points out in this book is, well, if you want to train an algorithm to recognize that a cat is a cat, you're going to need 100,000 pictures of a cat, roughly. Well, how do you get 100,000 mediated settlements to train your algorithm that are all relatively similar when in most jurisdictions, mediation is confidential? Now, you could say, well, we could use anonymized data, but as we know, and as studies have shown, anonymized data, when you're using it to feed an algorithm, doesn't necessarily stay anonymous for very long. And then, and this directly answers a question that Andy raised in his presentation, talking about the history of cases. And truth be told, in mediation, but also in arbitration, precedent isn't binding. And even in certain courts, in Quebec, for example, in the civil law system, decision precedent isn't necessarily binding. And so it's very difficult to use previous arbitrated cases or mediated cases in order to train an algorithm, even if you could have access to them. And so for these reasons, I haven't actually found any versions of AIDR that I find are true AIDR. And this, again, comes back to a little bit what Andy was referring to, that there is not much out there. The only one that I am aware of that we could call true AIDR is the Kids Court. And if you're not familiar with Kids Court, it's actually an app on the Amazon Echo. So you can download KidsCourt, and then instead of mediating problems between your children if they're fighting over who gets the last piece of cake, well, you can sit them down in front of Alexa, start KidsCourt, and let it parent in your stead, and then Alexa will decide who gets the piece of cake. Just a warning, your kids can also sue you using this application. So if you are a parent, be very careful if you give them access to this tool. And so, I'm trying to change slides instead of launching the video, and it's a heartwarming little tale if you actually watch it. So getting back to what I think is at least the short-term future of the use of artificial intelligence, and this falls again in phases 2 and 3 of what Andy was describing before, and that's Audrey, and I was referring to Luc Julia a few minutes ago, and he's the one that introduced me to this concept of augmented intelligence that was referred to by Graham a little while ago, and where he explains that basically artificial intelligence was never created. When you look at symbolic AI, and symbolic AI, for those of you who aren't familiar with the terminology, it's basically the AI that was developed from the 50s onto the 80s and 90s, where you would basically use expert systems, for example. Well, that's a form of symbolic AI, right? You're using symbols and if-then equations. And so when symbolic AI was created, it wasn't to replace us, it was to augment our understanding. It was to make us better, more efficient, and give us more information. And so what we're seeing now, and this isn't necessarily new, and for example, in 2003, there was this idea of the digital butler, which is very close to what Graham and his colleagues are now doing, the idea of having AI that can aid the third party to make a decision or to suggest an outcome. But what we're also seeing now is these same tools being used to help the first and second party, right? The actual parties to a dispute. And this is a slide of that I've borrowed from a presentation I did a few years ago with Shannon Salter of the Civil Resolution Tribunal. And this is basically how their expert system works, their Solution Explorer, which is a guided pathway that uses an expert system. At the Cyber Justice Laboratory, we're actually working on similar tools, and we've developed a tool that we have called the Justice Bot. And the Justice Bot is a tool that we've developed that's a mix of expert systems. So we're using symbolic AI, but we're also using machine learning to develop this application that allows party to gather more information about their case in order to make a more informed proposal or a more informed decision when they are negotiating with the other party or through the mediation process. So the current incarnation of the Justice Bot was trained using structured decisions from the Quebec Housing Board. And I say structured decisions because that's also a dirty little secret, if you will, that we often overlook. And it's the idea that artificial intelligence, specifically when you're moving in the field of machine learning or deep learning, that you can just take a decision, feed it to the algorithm, and the algorithm will train itself using all of these decisions. If that were the case, that would be very easy. But in fact, you actually have to, in many cases, structure the data. And so we have students that will go over our data, go over every decision and try to structure it in a way that it can then be fed to the AI and that it can actually train the algorithm. And so we're using decisions from the Quebec Housing Board. And the reason we're doing that is because the Quebec Housing Board is one of the tribunals in Quebec that generates the most decisions. And so we have access to over 1 million decisions, and over 1 million decisions on a relatively limited number of issues, because usually when somebody is not willing to pay their rent, there aren't 1 million reasons for that to happen, right? It's usually because, especially here in Quebec, of heating issues, of course, bed bugs or other elements that makes it that you cannot occupy your apartment. And so training this algorithm, we're getting outcomes, and this is just a general map of how our system works. And so we're able to feed the algorithm in a way that, again, it gives you information, it doesn't give you statistics. And this comes back to what we were discussing this afternoon, talking about the Loomis case and talking about Compass. And so there's this quote that I love that was attributed to Benjamin Disraeli, although nobody can actually confirm that he actually uttered any of these words. Well, he probably uttered all of these words, just not necessarily in this particular order. And so former Prime Minister Disraeli said there are three kinds of lies: damn lies, and statistics. And what we're seeing a lot are these tools that are considered to be predictive tools, right? They tell you you have an 85% chance of winning. Getting back to the Loomis case, you have an 80% chance of committing another crime if you're let out of jail early, or if you're not sent to jail for a relatively long period of time. Well, that doesn't really help us. Right? If I know I have an 85% chance of winning my case, what I'm really interested in is, why do I have a 15% chance of losing my case? Because that's the information that's going to be useful for me. And so just giving these statistical analysis and predicting an outcome doesn't help anyone. It sure doesn't help the parties, but it doesn't help any third party as well. It doesn't help a judge or an arbitrator to know, well, okay, you have an 80% chance, in 80% of cases, party A wins with similar facts. Yes, but why does that party win? And so instead of just predicting, what we're doing with this tool is trying to give information to augment the party's knowledge and make them better informed, and so that they can make better informed submissions and decisions. And so what we'll do is not just give a statistical analysis of, well, there are 5 decisions, and in those 5 that are similar to yours, and in those 5, 4 the person that had your position won, but rather saying these are the 5 decisions that look the most like your position, and these are the similarities, these are the differences, and this is why in this case they won, in this case they lost. And now, knowing this, you can make a more informed decision. And this would also help if we would add it to something like what Graham proposes, what SmartSettle does in a blind bidding system. What I've seen in certain mediation circles is basically, if parties sit at the table and the first party says, well, I'm going to offer you $250, and I believe that I own $500,000, well, I'm going to be extremely insulted, and I'm just going to walk out the room. And so what blind bidding does, and what tools like this do as well, is they don't necessarily temper expectations, but they explain why the other party, they allow you to understand why the other party is making an offer. And so if I know that there are 5 cases that have a similar fact pattern to mine, and the average amount that is granted to the plaintiff in these cases is, let's say, $250. Well, if I'm offered $250, I now have the knowledge, I have the information that explains why I'm getting this offer. And if I believe that I'm owed $10,000 and not $250, well, I'm not going to step away because I know where they're starting from. And so now I can move to a tool like like SmartSettle or like blind bidding tools, and start and negotiate, knowing all of this. And so what's interesting now is mixing all of these tools that are using artificial intelligence, depending on, again, on the definition of the term you use, and making it augmented intelligence, and not simply trying to propel ourselves into a future that might never happen of using AI in order to replace the third party. So on that note, I thank all of you for your attention, and I am going to open up the floor for questions. And for some reason, I started by mistake the video of the tool for the children there for the kids court. So I don't know if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any in the chat right now. So if you have any questions for either Ross, Graham, I'm sorry, Andy, or myself, feel free to add them in the chat. I'm guessing since we're 5 minutes away from the end of the day, people are probably just a bit tired with all of this, since we've had so much information today.
Can I
I was going to say, Graham, would you have anything
if
to add?
there's anyone in the audience has a question, by all means.
Well, no, please go first, sir.
Okay. I thought I had to. No, just I was thinking that when you were talking about that quotation about law and judgments is just a computational thing. I mean, you only have to think about, let's say, contractual disputes where the court is trying to get to what the parties agreed and understand. And as we know, words can be an imperfect device in expressing them. Words can be equivocal. And, I find it, that is clearly, and that will perhaps come in lots of different variations of complexity. We talk about human intuition, the ability of the judge to raise questions based on what people are arguing or the evidence that they've given. You have to be experienced in doing that sort of work as a judge to try to get into these nuances. I think the problem was not just that artificial intelligence can't emulate that with any degree of success, but it may eventually, but it's going to take a long time because it's this business about garbage in, garbage out again. I mean, they used to talk about it just in the sense of problems with code writing, but anything that requires machine learning, how far do you go along the building up of the knowledge before you set it loose on real cases? I think that's one of the problems. I did want to ask Andy, by the way, I saw, Andy, you in one of your screens where you went through the process in I'm not quite sure which court in China you were talking about, but at the end of the process, you said something about a database would develop or something would happen for those people who fail to comply with the resolution of the court or the online or the robo judge or whatever. I think that's a very interesting aspect. I wonder if you could just clarify exactly what happens in that regard. So I'm saying you said something about when there's a whole process and you showed what that system would be right at the end, after a resolution or a judgment had been issued, something was done to identify those parties who failed to comply with that verdict. Sorry, did you hear me, Andy?
Yes, I will get to that question. But before that, because I came to this forum, I also want to get some feedback on my current, thinking of the AI. What kind of AI is good for the ODR? One thing I started to wonder is the mediator is the mediator lack of intelligence, or why the mediator need the computer or digital technology to help? Because what I always think, the mediator is not really the smart. Maybe I'm wrong. Mediator may not be, don't need to be very smart. I mean, because no, the mediator are smart, but what I mean is the mediator really don't need to be a very knowledgeable and very quick. That's not really the character of character. I think a mediator need to really control the motion and to somehow very reasonable and very intuitive. So the character of mediator is not, I mean, putting it this way, the mediator may not be the good chess player or driver, because it's not the mediation process doesn't require the mediator to be very knowledgeable and extremely quick and very theoretical intelligence. So if that is the case, the mediation process is very different from play chess, drive the car. It's a different process. So now we try to use the same technology that behind the chess player, you know, AI chess player, or the autonomous driving to the ODR. I think that's wrong at the very beginning. So this is my I just try to see what is the what kind of computer intelligence or computer power we need to help the mediator, and it may not be the current artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And the
Well,
second thing,
as a mediator who's not very good at chess, I'm pretty hot on backgammon, by the way, if anyone else plays it. But the first skill of the mediator is not what he says, it's listening. It's trying to understand what people are saying. And secondly, helping the parties to believe that he does understand. It's not only listening, but it's making people realize they are being listened to. So there's a lot of human skills like that involved in I think pull you back from that dead end road I think you were going on, Candy, about mediators. But you're right, it is a very human, it's probably one of the hardest human skills for AI and machines to actually compete with at any real level.
Yeah.
Finding out about what previous cases have been, how they've been dealt with and what facts, yeah, fine. With Watson, IBM and the work there. I think, Nicholas, you mentioned Ross Intelligence. Sadly, I should make it clear it's nothing to do with me, but I know of that company, yes, and that's interesting work. But yeah, so I weren't quite sure where you were going, Andy, about how good mediators are, but I think I go along with you on that general point.
I see that it's already past the end of our presentation, so I don't know if there's another short question. I know in the comments, Frank asked me if my tool can be adapted to interpret other data sets in other jurisdictions. The answer is yes, and I can put you in contact with the people from my team if you're interested in testing it out. Otherwise, I know Ben Davis, and hi Ben, it's been a while, unfortunately, asking if we can factor in compassion and empathy. And I think this joins the point that Graham made just a few minutes ago, that is one of the issues, is how do you build all of these non-binary elements into AI. And so, Graham, I see you want to say something else, so I'll give you the last word before I give the floor back to
Neil. No, all right. Russ, I really regret only coming into today's proceedings because of pressure of work late on. I think it was just about 10 minutes from the first session. It's been a wonderful session. Wonderful to see how many people have come along, and I must congratulate Leah and Colin and everyone at NCTR who has obviously worked hard to build what is. I mean, in this year where we've, or even last year, missed our annual get-together forum of the fellows of NCTDR and everyone, it's really great to have this virtual event. And I'm certainly going to, it is being recorded, I believe.
It is,
Yeah.
it is. And if you look in the comments, everyone, this is for everybody's benefit, everything will be put online in a few days. For both days, will be posted on odr.info.
And thank you, Nicholas. And I also would like to know more about that system and how it might apply to the UK jurisdiction, of course. And that will be
my pleasure to discuss it with you. So thank you both. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Graham. Thank you, and I join Graham in congratulating the organizers for a great first day. So Colin, Ethan, Leah, and everybody else who took part in this. I think you did an amazing job, and this day flew by, at least it did in my case. And so, as you all know, there's a second day tomorrow. The agenda is available on the Google Docs link that was sent to you. If you do not have the link, you can look in the discussion thread, and Leah just made it available again. So you can save that before you turn off your session today so that you can join us tomorrow. So on that note, unless Leah or Colin has anything to add, I will simply say thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, afternoon, or morning, depending on where you are in the world, and see you all tomorrow. Goodbye,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Let me just, before we close, let's give that panel a round of applause. That was fantastic. Thank you, Nicholas.
You're very
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you, Nicholas. I'm tempted to nominate you, facilitate the whole rest of the conference because you did an excellent job.
I'm unfortunately teaching tomorrow, but
It's okay. That's all right. We'll get you next time.
Let me just add Jan Martinez to the list of people we thank. She was one of the organizers as well.
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Okay.
So
Thank
everyone
you.
have a wonderful night, and we will see you tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. California time, 10 a.m. East Coast time. And we're very excited about all of our presentations tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Let's all look for the red button. Cheers.
Thank you.